Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast with Jeff Mosher and Adam Caplan, who joins me now to talk a little birds as we get ready for training camp. Starts a week from today. Camp reports on Tuesday the 26th, and then they'll be on the field on Wednesday of next week. We'll have full coverage here during Football at 4. Plenty of previews and coverage at InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast as Adam Caplan takes a look at how this Eagles roster and team shape up against the rest of their NFC foes, the North, the South, the West. We've taken a big look at the East. We'll see how the Eagles roster shapes up because, Adam, it seems that they are a very popular team nationally. A lot of people like this roster. A lot of people like where they kind of stack up. So how does this Eagles roster and this team shape up against the rest of the NFC right now?
So, Mike, good to be with you. Yeah, before we get to that, just a couple notes here. Yeah, the next Tuesday, so a week from now, the Eagles do report. Every team will have practice by next Wednesday, the 27th. So, yeah, we're going to roll in there. I will be there next week. Next Wednesday, it'll be my I don't know, what is it, my 18th training camp tour. I'll start with the Eagles as I usually do. I don't always, but I usually do because I like to start there and work my way up and seeing the Giants and the Ravens and some East Coast teams. I'll fly out west. I'll come back, and I'll probably wind up my tour the last couple of days with the Eagles. But, I always like when I travel, Mike, I ask general managers and coaches and personnel people around the league, what do you think of this Philly team? If you've seen them, if you watched your tape from last season. So one of the things I like to do is, because we've already done I broke down the NFC East in terms of what the other teams look like. And we're doing that, by the way, with Greg Cosell from NFL Films. We've dropped already the outlook on the Cowboys and the Washington team, the Commanders, and all of them on every podcasting platform, whether it's YouTube, if you want to see our smiling faces, or if you want to download it or listen to it on Apple or Android platform, you could do that as well. And then next week, on Monday morning at 6 a.m., we're dropping our Giants show. And I'll tell you about the Giants, Mike, before we move to the rest of the NFC. They're going to be a little bit better than people think. I'm not saying they're going to make the playoffs, but their roster is much better than you think. The coaching is going to be better, so they'll be more competitive. And then we finish it off to open up training camp on Thursday morning. We break down the Eagles roster, and there are going to be some surprises, I could tell you. We just taped that show, and you're going to be surprised with some of the stuff that Greg has to say, and it kind of surprised us. So we look forward to releasing that to everybody else. But getting to the NFC North, Mike, if you just matched up, the one team, obviously Green Bay, you got Aaron Rodgers, and Green Bay's got a great defense. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's true. The Eagles are way better than Green Bay at wide receiver. You take away Devontae Adams. And this is the one thing, Mike, with Green Bay. Yeah, they have Aaron Rodgers, still one of the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the NFL. But who's he throwing to? Sammy Watkins can't play anymore. He's a number 4 receiver. Alan Lazard has never been a full-time starter. Randall Cobb is near the end of his career as a slot receiver. Christian Watson is a very raw second-round pick out of North Dakota State, who I saw at the Senior Bowl run away from a lot of defenders, but he needs a lot of development. So I'm not saying if the Eagles make the playoffs that they're going to be better than Green Bay or they're going to be better than Green Bay this season. But if I'm a Packer fan, I do wonder and I do worry. And by the way, Robert Tonyan, their starting tight end's coming back from a torn ACL. I do wonder, and I would be concerned about their ability to have some playmakers without Devontae Adams.
Yeah, Green Bay is a team I think we all just take for granted, right? I mean, they won that division going away last year, and we just take for granted that, hey, they have Aaron Rodgers. That means they're going to be right there again. Do you think that they, we did the North preview with Andrew on Thursday of last week, and he doesn't think they're going to I think he had Minnesota ahead of them this year.
That would be hard to do. They have a new coaching staff. Now, there's changing schemes from a 43 to a 34. Now, my buddy Paul Allen, the play-by-play voice for the Vikings, he thinks it's been at least 40 years since they've run a 34. He cannot remember the last time. I certainly can't. No one seems to be able to figure that out. It is really hard in 1 year to go from a 43 to a 34. Now, they have personnel that'll somewhat match it, but you can't expect them to be as good on defense. They're a little bit shaky at corner. Their offensive line's not nearly as good as the Eagles. We're talking about Minnesota here. Now, obviously they've got Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. KJ Osborne has proved to be a very good backup who had to start last season at times when Thielen was hurt. And the great Dalvin Cook, who's great when he's healthy, but he has problems staying healthy. They have a chance to be 500. I definitely see them over 5, 9, and 8, that kind of area. And plus, they'll be more aggressive with the passing game. Mike Zimmer, the former head coach, micromanage their offense, but that won't be going on because Kevin O'Connell, the head coach, will call the plays on offense.
Over in the South, we did that 2 weeks ago. Jeff Mosher pinch hit for Andrew that day, and that was the day that Baker Mayfield had been traded. So we kind of called an audible and did the South that day. You've got Carolina there, who obviously struggled. You've got Tampa Bay with Brady back. You've got the Saints, who are kind of a wild card there. And then, of course, that division has seemingly been Tampa's the last couple of years. So how does the Eagles roster and teams shape up against that division?
Yeah, so, if you just took Tampa, obviously Tampa's better than the Eagles. You saw them embarrass the Eagles twice last season. Brady just absolutely annihilated. I mean, I get it. Brady's the best quarterback in NFL history, but it was like the Eagles brought a slingshot to a gunfight. I mean, it was just embarrassing. So defensively, the Eagles are going to be much better than they were last year because they've got better talent. Now, how much better remains to be seen because the defensive coordinator's got to do a better job. Now, they match up real well. They annihilated Atlanta. I know it was week 1 and last season. It was Arthur Smith's first game as the head coach, who, by the way, could have very well been the Eagles head coach if they were willing to wait, but they weren't. He took the offer that he had from Atlanta, and he took it, and they were 7-10. They were respectable. You mentioned Baker Mayfield. Talking to the Panthers, Mike, they feel really good about their roster. They were very aggressive in free agency. They're going to have 4 new starters in the offensive line. They had one of the bottom 3 offensive lines. They were in it for Andre Dillard last spring, actually last fall at the trade deadline, but Eagles weren't trading for him. They filled out that left tackle, so they clearly don't want Andre Dillard. They got Ike Iguano, who's arguably the best left tackle for this draft. So they're looking good at receiver. They're looking much better on the offensive line. They had a good defense last season under Phil Snow, who you remember, Mike, who coached with Matt Roll Temple, was really good. They're going to be very competitive. They're a team that should be over 500. You know, it's funny. Their over-under now, I think, is 6.5. It went up 1 game after the Mayfield trade. I love the over there. They are going to be over. They're going to be at least 9 wins. I think they'll be 9 and 8. I think that'll be the bottom of what they'll be this season. And then New Orleans, yeah, boy, they were aggressive, no doubt about it. Tyrann Mathieu, who the Chiefs did make an offer to re-sign. Some people think he's near the end of his career, but they've got a very good defense. Michael Thomas come back from major ankle surgery. His second one. He's barely played the last 2 years. Jarvis Landry comes in there. Chris Olave, a first-round pick at wide receiver. So they had a bottom 5, bottom 7 receiver core. Now they've upgraded it. They've got a new left tackle in Trevor Penning. My issue is, too, though, Jameis Winston, their starting quarterback, comes from a torn ACL, and Alvin Kamara could be suspended. So you have to keep that in mind. That would concern me.
Adam, the West, many people thought was the deepest, best division last year. Arizona, obviously, with San Francisco and Seattle all coming up short behind the defending Super Bowl champions. So you put the Eagles out West. How do they stack up with that division?
Well, they're much better in Seattle. Now, I don't believe Jimmy Garoppolo will wind up being released, but if somehow they got him, that would make certainly Seattle be better because they're terrible at quarterback. They're in the worst shape of any NFL team at quarterback right now. They don't have a valid starter. Drew Lock will wind up winning that job, but he's below average. When you look at it, Eagles are better than Seattle. The Cardinals know that DeAndre Hopkins for 6 games. That certainly would concern me. They really regressed. Kyler Murray, the Cardinals starting quarterback, really regressed after Hopkins got hurt. He had 2 separate injuries, knee surgery, and then before that he had a hamstring strain which lingered. So that would concern me without him for those 6 games. Hollywood Brown is there, who will play opposite A.J. Green, but D-Hop is still one of the top 5 receivers in the league. The Eagles, I think, are going to wind up being a little bit better than the Cardinals. The Rams are better than the Eagles. They're defending Super Bowl champs. They lost Von Miller, but it's not like Von Miller was there for very long. He was just there for the trade deadline. Certainly helped him. They got Bobby Wagner in their 34 defense to play inside linebacker. It's got a 2-year structure, so they'll be there for 2 years. You still got Jalen Ramsey is terrific. They've got a very good front, good, not great offensive line. Their issues are on the interior of their offensive line. They're going to be very good at tackle, and they're good at wide receiver, the OBJ, if he comes back, and they want him back. He's come back from yet another major knee injury. Cam Akers, he'll be fully back from his Achilles. Stafford's terrific. Had the best year of his career by far. This is a really good football team, very well coached. They're the healthiest team in the National Football League the last 2 seasons. They're way better. And the Niners, they probably overachieved last season, Mike. They're a good team. They're well coached. But if Trey Lance is the starter and they want him to be the starter, you have to think they're going to take a little bit of a step back. He was sort of underwhelming last season, the little that he played. So I think they're there. I think the Niners may be slightly better. They did win very early in the season. Was it week 2 at Philly last season? The Eagles were totally inept offensively. They're very good defensively, led by D'Amico Ryans, their defense coordinator, who will be a head coach probably next year. So if you looked at it right now, the Eagles, to me, if we were to rank the NFC teams right now, Mike, if I would probably say the Eagles are somewhere around the 5th best. I would put Tampa ahead of them, the Rams ahead of them, Niners slightly ahead of them. After that, only because it's Aaron Rodgers, their defense is better than the Eagles. I don't care what the Eagles do. And I know they're going to be better because they added talent. Green Bay's much better than the Eagles no matter what you say. But they're close because Eagles are way better on the offensive line and at wide receiver. Now, the Packers are good at running back. But I got to take Rodgers just because he's just so much better than Hurts. It's, obviously, we all know this. I think they're somewhere around 5th, which, quite frankly, it could be move up to 4th if we were going to rank all just by conference. I mean, you could argue that they're 4. They're somewhere between 4 and 5 right now. That's pretty good, considering they barely got the playoffs and they got housed at Tampa.
Football for Adam Caplan, InsideTheBirds.com, the Inside the Birds podcast. And, all right, with training camp, we look for some surprises, some guys who might be under the radar, Adam, some guys that maybe our listeners, don't know too much about. We used to call him Mr. Lehigh, right? They used to have guys who stood out at training camp. So give us a couple of camp surprises that you'll have your eye on.
Well, it's funny because I would not put, Henry Josie would not be in my off-season. So do you remember Henry Josie?
Yes.
Who the fans hated Chip Kelly for. I think it was Chip Kelly who cut him, if I'm not mistaken. And I warned them that he had major knee concerns, and the fans just got all bent up out of shape that I said he will never make it because of the knee problems. Well, he went to CFL and his career ended. So
he was a running back.
You got to be careful. Off-season stuff, training camp stuff, take it for what it is. You can't overrate that stuff. But on my list, we put this out 6 weeks ago on our show. Actually, probably a little bit later than that, maybe. It was after the first 2 weeks or 3 weeks of OTAs. It's actually when they only did 7-on-7s. They never did any more than that, and we're told they only did them in the final 2 weeks. Where Covey was the most outstanding receiver in terms of everything they asked him to do of the young kids. He's going to make it as their punt returner. You watch. I made this prediction weeks ago, and I'm going to continue to say it. He'll wind up being their punt returner. Here's another one for you, Kyron Johnson, who will line up at strong side linebacker, probably. He's a little bit smaller. I don't know if he could play defensive end at this level. He'll be an edge rusher, however they want to use him. We still don't know exactly what their scheme's going to look like. We know they're going to run 43. And we don't know how much 5-2 they're going to run like they did last season. Whether it's still going to be as much, we couldn't tell you. We don't know that. But behind Reddick, they need to find out whether it's Patrick Johnson or Kyron Johnson. Here's why Kyron Johnson, number one, will make the team as a 6th-round pick. He will wind up being one of the best special teams players because he's one of the fastest. And that has a lot of value, Mike. So look for him to make the team. He's a guy that did flash a little bit, and the Eagles did a lot of homework on him. So look for him to make it. And then here's what. Now, see, people had questions about not Jimmy Moreland. They had questions about why the Eagles cut Craig James. He was never going to make it anyway. One way or the other, because their top 4 spots are taken. They'd like the 5th guy to be, whether it's Josh Jobe, they gave a lot of money to as an undrafted free agent, whether it's Josh Blackwell, who's another kid they gave decent money to, or Mario Goodrich is another guy. Or Tate Gowan, when they made a trade, the Ertz trade, because they like his size. Craig James was never going to make the team. So one of those guys is going to make it. But Jimmy Moreland's a guy they've really liked for a couple of years. He could play inside or outside. He'll also bring a little depth and competition to the slot position behind Maddox. So he's the guy that, folks, keep an eye on him in training camp. We barely talked about him because I'd heard he didn't really stand out one way or the other in OTAs, but take a look at him. And finally, before we get out of here, Jaquiski Tart. We will talk about him with Greg Cosell next Thursday. Trust me, a lot on him. He's going to push Anthony Harris. Whether the team says it's a competition or not, don't worry about what they say. It's all about what they do. Tart's going to push Harris. He's a really good football. In fact, he's a better football player than Harris. He's had a major injury history. He's 30 years old. These are all factors. So is Harris in terms of age. But Tart's just a better football player, but he has trouble staying on the field. Keep an eye on him. I can't wait to go to practice. I know they really won't hit, but when they do what's called the thud drill, when you can't take a guy to the ground, but you're going to use an elbow or shoulder, watch him because he's a guy who's super physical.
I'll leave you with this. Did you catch any of the LaShawn McCoy conversation about Nnamdi Asomugha? Now, do you remember Asomugha when he signed and the talk being like, this guy's cooked, he can't play?
Well, here's the thing. So I was doing radio. Remember, it was the night of the Hunter Pence trade. Yep. It was just an unbelievable day for doing sports radio. I was doing radio here in Philly. And I almost fell off my chair. I mean, because the Eagles they were in on Nnamdi, then they were out but monitoring, and they got in at the last minute because it fell through with the Jets. And look, remember, this is coming out of lockout, if I'm not mistaken. And this is when Juan Castillo was the defense coordinator, I believe.
Yep. And
this was an absolute mistake. Juan was just not ready to be. He hadn't coached defense since college and since the 80s. And this was just a mistake by Andy Reid. And Nnamdi he had lost a little bit in his legs, and he was for him to be successful, you had to use him a certain way. And if you remember, he's a little bit of an odd guy, good person. And he's actually an actor, but he never fit in the culture. You remember, he'd eat in his car, not in the lunchroom. It's a very odd guy, and it. So the Eagles, the dream team thing, signing all these players. When this works in the NBA, it does not work in the NFL. You could mix it. Like, you could have a good mix of drafted players and sign selected free agents, but you can't. You got to be bringing the right guys here. That was an absolute disaster, and those stories were hilarious. Asante Samuel, yeah, boy, Samuel was. I've always found Asante to be very entertaining, and he used to give some of the local media here guff. It was actually pretty funny.
Yeah, that was. I was laughing. I remember that vividly because at the time, I was coaching baseball, and Castillo's son was playing in a baseball tournament that we were coaching in, and he would be sitting out in left field, and he had this huge binder in his lap the whole time, and he just sat out there. What's
Juan
that?
Did?
Juan did, yeah.
Juan had the binder?
Yeah, he just sat out in the outfield the whole time with this huge binder, and, he had got named the defensive coordinator, and people were like, what in the world is he thinking? But there he was at all these games with this huge binder, and we pulled in to the parking lot the night we were playing Castillo's son's team, and it was just announced that they had signed Asomugha, and because that was the lockout, and there was moves happening like left and right all over the place.
It was pretty awesome. It was just an awesome day, too. I know it didn't work out for the Eagles, but it was just an awesome day in Philadelphia sports because, remember, they got Hunter Pence later, and it was just one of these situations where you're like, how's this happen? This is unbelievable. We forget, as you said, how big of a splash the Asomugha signing was and how they beat the Jets, and that Rex Ryan was so upset. And then to get Pence via trade from Houston, he was still really good. He wasn't that good here, but it was a great day in Philadelphia sports. Unfortunately, neither worked out, quite frankly, as well as we thought it would.
That's right. All right, Adam Caplan, plenty of insight and analysis and content on Eagles training camp over at InsideTheBirds.com and Inside the Birds podcast. It'll be revving up for the season. They've got all the previews up there with Greg Cosell, so check that out on all the Inside the Birds platforms and right here on Football at 4. Adam, take care, bud.
Thank you.